So with the Discovery merger with Warner with Warner Brothers, excuse me, there, thus effectively becoming Warner Brothers Discovery, a lot of people are concerned for AEW. And the reason being is because AEW is broadcasted on TNT and TBS. Now, it came out today through various sources that because of this merger, changes are going to happen. And one of the bigger changes that's already happening is the fact that Discovery, Warner Brothers Discovery, they are abandoning scripted programs on TNT and TBS. Now, some might say that shouldn't affect AEW since they're not totally scripted. And that is true. It shouldn't affect them. But it's still something to really open your eyes about, because it's like, wait a minute. So a lot of our favorite scripted programs are going to be gone? That's about right. They're going to be out the window and probably looking for newer homes. And, that's one thing to be concerned about if you're a fan of Snowpiercer, American Dad, stuff like that. But there's something else that, people should be curious about. And that is, who's going to be running the TNT, TBS side of things in this merger? Well, one person that apparently is going to be running it is Kathleen Finch. I think that's her name. Let me bring this up here. This is from The Wrap back on April 7th. It states, and I'm going to try to find it here, that, let me see here. Let's see. It says, Kathleen Finch, who oversaw Discovery's TV networks, will now serve as Chief Content Officer and Chairman of a new group that will oversee over 40 networks in Warner Discovery's portfolio, including TBS and TNT and TruTV. Now, what that means as Chief Content Officer and Chairman, or Chairwoman, and overseeing content of over 40 networks, including TNT and TBS and TruTV, what that could mean with Kathleen Finch is basically AEW, the current contract with Turner, with Warner Media, may not be renewed. In other words, it may be over by 2024, whatever the case may be. Which means, basically, AEW may have to see a new home, or may have to look for a new home in the future. Now, I know some people might say, well, we shouldn't be really concerned about that right now. There's, they're making bank, they're making money. They shouldn't have to worry, right? And you'd be correct. Because one thing that Eric Bischoff mentioned when he talked about this is that unlike WCW, who was a Turner-owned product, AEW is independent. That means basically, as long as they're bringing in the numbers, as long as they're focusing on, making enough money for, through merchandise and ticket sales and all that, as long as they prove to be a viable commodity, for the Turner networks, there shouldn't be anything to really worry about. And that is indeed true. If they are a program as part of an agreement to be aired on the Turner networks over the course of, 4 years, 5 years, something like that, and they're proving to be very viable through the viewership numbers and the money that they make through merchandise and all that, and ticket sales and pay-per-view buys and all that, then them being removed from, the Turner schedule on both Wednesdays and Fridays shouldn't be an issue. But here's the thing. A lot of shows have been in that same situation in the past. A lot of programs have been in that same situation in the past. And normally, well, not normally, but once in a while, surprisingly out of nowhere, those programs have the rug pulled out from under them. And I know people don't like hearing what Jim Cornette has to say. I know some people don't like hearing what Eric Bischoff has to say, even though they have experience in these areas. Mostly Bischoff has experience. But here's the thing. Even though they are an independent entity, if you will, that being AEW, it doesn't mean that once their contract is done, because Warner Brothers Discovery is going to have to honor the contract no matter what. But it's not going to matter when the contract is done unofficially in the next several years. Here's whether or not they're bringing in the big bucks, they're bringing in the big numbers and all that. If Kathleen Finch and those that she's surrounded with as the chief content officer and chairwoman of over 40 networks, which include TNT, TBS, and TruTV, if she feels that she doesn't think AEW fits, the licensing or fits their image anymore, even despite bringing in the big numbers, then Tony Khan's going to have to start shopping around for a new home. And if I should say, that happens, not saying it will, but if that happens, it might make it harder for AEW to find a home. It might make it harder. They might end up in the same situation, that TNA, aka Impact Wrestling, I should say, found themselves in for a while. Because you got to remember, several occasions, Impact, the only way you could watch them was through syndication and YouTube. And at times, they had to actually put their main program on YouTube for people to watch. And that might be an avenue that Tony Khan has to look into. That, Netflix, Paramount Plus, you name it. But will it happen? Will it happen? You see, they talk about the potential of going to HBO Max. And that could happen too. But if this lady is in charge of over 40 networks, including TNT, TBS, and so on, and whoever else they put in charge along with her, let's say the streaming services, who's to say HBO Max, Discovery Max, whatever they call it, HBO Discovery, whatever they're going to rename it, rebrand it, who's to say they're even going to consider putting AEW on their service? You see, that's the thing they have to be curious. That's the one thing people have to be curious about. Will they do that? So what I'm trying to say basically in the end, so I don't overrun here, what I'm trying to say in the end is just keep an eye out with this Kathleen Finch and her being in charge now of everything from TBS and all that, to see exactly what's in store for AEW, because things might change in the next several years.